Hello, Christine.
Hi, Cindy.
I am psyched to get into conversation with you, like I always am, about this idea of it's what happens when we become parents and all that goes into the idea of becoming a parent without us really even knowing it. And I was listening to a story yesterday. It was about infertility treatment, actually. And it was a really moving story of this couple who had been trying for years and years and having miscarriages and not having luck with fertility treatment. And the story was actually on some new technology, that may not be the right word, but new study on a possible treatment to help people who want to become parents be able to get pregnant. And in listening to them, of course, I felt the heartbreak of them not being able to get pregnant, but then also having a successful pregnancy and then losing that baby due to miscarriage. And what they said that is so hard is that the woman hoping to become a parent was saying, I just want to create a human being who's a little bit of me and a little bit of my husband. And it's so, of course, like we all can relate to that because for the most part, I think all of us have felt that when we enter this idea of becoming parents. And I listened to that thinking, okay, but like that is not the way to start becoming a parent, because what sounds so innocent and what we can think of as, of course, that's so sad. I listened to it and I thought, oh, so sad for whom? For this potential child to enter their world where already this idea is that this new human being isn't a person of their own. And so it's a little bit of me and a little bit of my partner. And along with that, again, all from a culture, all from our loving parents, into this idea of who we want them to be, who we think they will be, what we want them to do, what we think they will achieve, what we hope they will achieve. All of this misunderstood thoughts about, I want them to have something that I didn't have, or I'm going to create the person who I wasn't ever able to be. And all of that, which is so understandable and falls into what we often call like the fantasy of what we think having a child will be and what we think being a parent will be, is actually what messes our kids up in the first place. And when we can really dive into understanding what goes into the buildup of this fantasy and what you and I know so deeply well and experienced, and for many listeners, if you had a child who from day one or in the first several years of their life, or perhaps later in life, is a person very unlike the person you expected them to be, it's a loss. But so important for us to realize that it's not a real loss. It's a loss of this fantasy, something that was in our hearts, something that was in our mind of what we expected and wanted it to be. And the tighter we hold on to that, the more difficult it is to fully see this baby, this child, this person who is a complete person. It makes it so much harder to see them in that light of them being their own sovereign being. So I'll start with that.
Well, I mean, when you say this and we think of where we came from and how we grew up and all the influences that came upon us, right, that kind of created who we became. I think when you say it's hard for us to see the child, I think to myself, it's so hard for us to see ourselves,
Yes.
let alone see the child, right? And I think this is kind of the foundation of everything we're talking about, is that where did we lose ourselves along the way? Where did we lose sight of who we were when we were born as an individual being? When did we lose sight of that? That now has us in this space of looking at parenting and having children within this fantasy of a child being a certain way or acting a certain way or being like mom or dad, and we do this from the very start when we have the child, and everyone around us is like, oh, he has your nose or he has your eyes. And so, and you and I have talked about this, that child is already losing their identity from day one.
Correct.
Right?
So that if we see that it's happening to our children, of course, this is happening or happened to us. I mean, I so clearly remember the feeling when my daughter Mira was born. I couldn't articulate it at the time and only saw it later, but my fear of who she was going to be was equal to the fear of who I was. I didn't know. I already had one child. I knew my identity as a parent, and this shook up the snow globe. And it was so much of that feeling of who am I to a parent of this child who I don't know. But in reality, that's kind of how we are with any child, but we think we know. And then we're so removed. Who I am as a parent to Mira is very different than just who I am as a person, which doesn't change at all. And I think what you and I know so well is that these children are the ones who actually provide us the opportunity to find ourselves, getting to re-know ourselves and rediscovering who we were in the first place.
Absolutely. And so this is exactly why there can't be this guide for parents before they're going to have children of, what it's going to be like to be a parent, or what it's going to, I don't know. There are so many books out there that kind of get parents ready to have their child. And I find that so interesting because already there again, we're being told how we're going to parent, how we're going to be as parents, what kinds of boundaries we're supposed to set with our children. None of it is from a space of empowering ourselves as a human being to tap into our innate ability to guide a child in the ways that we're meant to, that are going to be in most alignment with the child. Because from the very start, we've been told what to do and how to do things. Even you go to university or you go to college, you're being taught how to do something for a job that you're going to do at some point. We're out there learning, and that's important. But there also has to be this piece where we're learning about ourselves, where we're slowing down and listening to, well, what do I want? And what do I like? And what feels right to me? Or what inner wisdom do I have, that can guide me in some way to be of best influence on the child that I'm meant to raise, right? It's more about positive influence than it is about, the word guiding our child. Because I think even when I say guiding our child, my system is saying, wait, that's not even the right word really, because it's again, as though I know better. Right. And yes, we understand certain things about life and about being part of this world. And there are so many things that we are there to teach our children. Right. But we're also meant to create this space for them to learn about themselves. Something that I feel we didn't really get to experience as children because there was so much of this focus on, well, you need to go to school and you have to have good grades. And I mean, even just the lack of opportunity to experience contrast, different things that may have been outside the box. We were mostly given, different things that fit inside this little rigid box to choose from and to be good at or to excel in and so forth. So it's very difficult to figure out, well, who am I? And then to fall into this trap of, well, I don't feel like I fit in any of this, so I'm not good enough. And so I think this kind of brings us into this conversation about, well, what happens when you have a child that now is different or has a diagnosis or that is not like everyone else, when we learned from a young age that you had to fit into this box.
Yeah. And I want to piggyback on what you were saying in terms of we learn what we're not. And I think that when we have children who are not within the box, we set ourselves up because our lens becomes who this child is not. And whether it's my child is not going to go to the typical preschool, my child is not going to walk, my child is not going to have friends, my child is not going to be a soccer player, my child is not going to go to the mainstream school, whatever it may be, we learn to see them all around us from our own idea, well, not our real own ideas, but the ideas that have been indoctrinated into us. And anytime we go to a doctor's appointment where they're looking at skills but development, where they're behind, it forces us to have this lens of lack and to see our children for who they are not versus who they are. And so I'm thinking back to, parents who read all of these parenting books, again, with the best of intentions, to be as prepared as they possibly can be. And regardless as to whether their child is a neurotypical kid or not, it's a setup. And it is what removes us from, again, as you were saying, like from who we are, and causes this rift between our ability to see our children for who they are, and to allow them to be the mirrors for us to see who we are. Because when we came into the world, we didn't have those inhibitions.
No, of course not. We were perfect when we were born. There was nothing ever wrong with us from the very start. There's nothing wrong with anyone out there, right? The only thing that is wrong is when we're not on the right path and we're not in alignment, we don't feel right inside.
Right.
And that's what's wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So from the very start, it should be more about, and I come back to this positive influence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So instead of being or living from this space of lack, of looking at what our kids are not, which is exactly what ends up happening. And especially when we go to appointments and we're constantly reminded about their limitations and what they're not doing. And so this sets us up on this path of always thinking of what is not there, of what we don't want, of what we're fearing. And so we're in this space of negativity. And then what happens is that energy is then passed on to the child.
Yeah.
Right? And so that doesn't serve the child, because in truth, what would really serve the child is to be that positive influence that starts to focus on what we do want, or, those things that are there, what they are.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that's a tricky thing, because we can't necessarily see all those things that they are if we're still in a space of not knowing what we are or who we are. Right? So this is where there's this, it's intertwined between what is our child showing us about us, mm-hmm. so that we can really get more in touch with who we are and come back to that space. So then we can become that positive influence for them to shine brightly as they are meant to be.
Right. Right. And I would add, as you were saying too, looking at who they are not, or that there is something broken needing to be fixed, that yes, that energy is displaced onto them. So they begin to see that themselves that way, but also how it's reflected back on us, right? So it's what we see them, how they feel, but also in the same way that energy is sort of boomeranged back to us, in us feeling not enough and broken. And so when we can deconstruct and see what it is that we have been taught to hold as important, when we can release ourselves of the boxes, we're able to connect in what we've talked about and what I've talked about in my book is this soul to soul connection. And there's no brokenness in our soul, and there's absolutely no brokenness in our children's soul. So when we can connect soul to soul, we have a very different experience in our being with one another.
Yeah. And when you speak of this, the word that rings for me is freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom to be, freedom to connect with one another in full authenticity, freedom to love each other unconditionally, moving out of this space of expectation and needing to be or needing to do or needing to fit in, or, this whole world and all of these things that we're taught. It really doesn't work for our kids that are different. It doesn't work. And, I think that's the beautiful thing, is that we cannot mold them.
Yeah. That's right.
Right? So
That's right.
it forces us to break out of all of this, to move more into that space of freedom where we can start to really connect. And when we learn to connect that way with our children, that changes our relationship with everyone around us.
Absolutely.
It deepens that connection.
So true. And while it's not always attainable to be in that space all the time, it's something we can deepen. And to simply know, like, if you've experienced that, even for a small percentage of time, just knowing that that is there is what can help bring us back. Because we live in this culture. We live in a culture where the boxes are being checked, where there are expectations, where we can feel not enough. We will have moments where we're with our children where, despite feeling so solid and soul to soul connected, can still bring us down at moments. I know that that's my experience. I imagine it is for you and others as well. But knowing that there is this other place to inhabit that is available to us any time that we want it makes such a huge difference.
When you say this, it makes me think of any moment when I'm sitting with my daughter who's non-ambulatory and nonverbal, and there are many people that are going to have their own opinions of her and what her capabilities are and what her abilities or what the possibilities are for her. But when I'm with her and it's just her and I see so much there. I feel so much there. And just being in her presence is the most beautiful moment. It's so peaceful. It's so serene. It's so present. I can't even explain it to you. It's this space and time where there's nothing else but just us in being, and there's only love that's present. And there's none of this expectation to be anything other. There's only this deep appreciation of one another. Yeah. Right? And there's only this ability to see beyond the illusion of that physical self. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because there's so much more to us. That's only one part of us. Our physical self is one part of so much more. And so if we're so focused on that physical aspect, mm-hmm. we're missing the boat, right? And I think, so when I think of this, because my daughter isn't moving and I'm mm-hmm. thinking about the physical and just her health and so forth. If I was only focusing on those parts, I wouldn't be seeing all of these other aspects. Right. Correct. But culture has a tendency to have you linger here. Yeah. Because they don't see all those things.
Yeah. And I think that, in listening to you, I'm also imagining that some listeners who might have kids with, more behavioral issues and thinking it is not serene, it is not peaceful, and our home is not peaceful, and I don't get to just be in that peaceful place. I think it's also important to hear that oftentimes we're in this place of, I need to fix this, I need to stop it, he shouldn't be, she shouldn't be, she's not, it's even if it's not even in the midst of chaos, so much of what contributes to that chaos is our thinking around what should be and the fears. I'm not saying that when you are able to step out of that everything's going to be serene and peaceful, but that connection, or let me say it this way, all of the fears and the shoulds and the what ifs that surround any behavior leads us to respond in a different way and takes energy from us onto our kids. So I know that even when my daughter may be having a crying fit or whining or screaming at the top of her lungs, like that in no way could I say is peaceful and serene. But how I choose to respond to that and what else is going on in my world at the moment has a tremendous impact on how I experience that. So if I'm in the middle of making dinner or trying to get somewhere on time or having a conversation with somebody else, I may get really irritated. When I can say, okay, this needs to be tended to, and I just need to turn off the stove. Dinner's going to be later. This conversation is going to happen later, and I can just attune to her, which again, and sometimes I can't, but when I can, that same behavior and what it looks like doesn't change at all. But my ability to connect to her and maybe even soften that, or for her to be understood and for me to be able to set a limit or a boundary from a place of connecting with her is incredibly different. I hope that makes sense to people listening.
No, of course. I mean, it's how you're showing up. It's the energy you're bringing in. And, if we're coming in with an energy that is just as agitated as our child, we're not going to serve them in co-regulating. Right. And at the same time, when you speak of this, I think again about that positive influence. When we come in and we bring in our own energy and we model what that energy feels like for them to co-regulate with us, we're teaching them how to come into that space, right? Positive influence being the energy we bring in, positive influence being the words that we speak. So speaking to them with words that are kind, compassionate, loving, that make them feel safe, that don't make them feel inadequate, that don't make them feel like they're bad, really being able to look at the child and see, well, where's this behavior coming from? Understanding more deeply what that's about and being able to show up with that kind of energy. But it's also about our thinking, right? When we're thinking and fearing certain behaviors, thinking about those behaviors we don't want to see, right? So if we're in the constant habit of having our children having a meltdown at specific places or with specific people, and we're coming into a space already fearing that, or already being in that space of not wanting and thinking of what we don't want, well, usually we see more of that, right? Our children can tap into our energy and they feel into us. And so when we can be in that state of really seeing them and valuing them, and when they have a strong sense of self that is positive, often you see that those behaviors start to kind of settle a little bit more too, right? I mean, it's a combination of things, and all children are going to have meltdowns at some point, especially when they are nonverbal, right? Sometimes they have to let out those feelings. Other kids, I've noticed some children, they really need to yell out their emotions. Like it just has to come out. And that's simply how it comes out. Other children will just really cry so much. I mean, I think it's very individual, but understanding that those feelings have to come out somewhere and that we don't want them to keep them in, right? And to hold the space for it. At the same time, getting a deeper understanding of, I wonder what led to this, or, how could I help my child release more of that stuff on a regular basis so it doesn't feel so explosive? Or how much is my child picking up on from other people? How sensitive is my child that she or he doesn't know what's his or what's not his, and then comes home and just explodes? There's so many. I mean, I'm trying to think of one example and I can't, because there's there's so many families that I've spoken to with so many different types of children, because every child is unique. And getting a sense of that exact child and what's going on, and just being able to come in with that energy and that understanding helps us come in with that positive influence so that they can feel supported, right? And so that those behaviors can start to shift.
Yes. And you can see how insidious culture's teachings fall into all of these moments, right? We are always, I don't want to say up against it because it's not a fight, but when we can see culture's influences and our family's influences and our own thoughts and how they impact our quick shift into looking at what is wrong, we can see it with some lightness, right? We can see it as whether it's this is just what I have been taught, but isn't my reality, which can make a huge shift. But it's everywhere. So understanding it is really perhaps the greatest key in being able to unlock its tether to us and the way that we see our children. So understanding how we have been removed, going back, like how we have been removed from our sense of self by the pure intentions of our family from, I want to say these institutions, but we don't really know if it's pure intention, but the simple things like school and jobs, but who we have been taught, what we have been taught defines our worth. And so when we have kids who aren't going to fit that mold, it can be a struggle, or it can be like the coolest awareness and shift for us to reclaim ourselves.
Well, and it's both, right? Because at the beginning, it is a struggle. It is hard. It's confusing. We don't really understand, because there's this feeling inside that's like, but my child is amazing and I think they're so wonderful and I have this deep connection. But then everyone else isn't seeing what I'm seeing. Everyone else thinks my child's a problem. Everyone else is, and all these things, right? And so there's this influence of how we're supposed to deal with our child. I think of a parent who has a problematic child in school, right? And so, but the child is fine at home, but they're behaving in a certain way at school. And then there's this conversation with the parents about, well, what's going on? We need to set boundaries. This is unacceptable. And then parents are influenced to start acting in a certain way or behaving in a certain way with their kids, or punishing or disciplining in certain ways with their children because of this influence from the external. But does it really feel in alignment? Is it really what's best for your child? Is that really the problem? Is that really going to solve the problem? No, because if the child is behaving in a certain way, there's something happening on a deeper level, which is exactly where you said that understanding, right? And being able to do that, also knowing that when we're connected to our sense of self, who we are, what feels right, what doesn't feel right, we're going to know, no, this is not right. And I'm going to say no to this external influence and go with what feels right and in alignment to me in terms of how I'm going to positively influence my child to shift out of this behavior, right? Like this is just a big, massive problem, like huge, right? Because we have this parent who is just being pulled from one side to the other, not really knowing what to do. And that is so hard for a parent to sit in that space, right? And so, but when you say, there's this beautiful opportunity, and it's a wonderful way to start tapping into that, who am I, right? Until we get to that place, it's hard.
Yeah.
But then
this is not an easy road.
It's not. I think in the end, this is why you and I are having these conversations, to begin to awaken parents to this other way of walking down this path with their children, that there is nothing wrong with their children. Every single child that is born is perfect, and there's nothing wrong with them. And it's simply more of this understanding of, what do I need to do? What am I being called to do right now to be able to become that positive influence for my child to step into who they are? right? And so we're having these conversations to awaken families, to bring awareness to them that there is this other way. And that's exactly why we have this podcast. So we can start talking about all of these different parts and, slowly beginning to give guidance as to how these parents can step into this new path. And so I think we'll close with that, Cindy.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Sounds great.
We will move into another topic next time where we will dive deeper into this idea that we have around parenting and how this impacts how we parent our neurodiverse children.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.